Fourth piece of evidence for evolution is a structure called a vestigial structure. So the last structures were homologous. These are called vestigial because they are reduced in size or function. So if something is vestigial, that means it's smaller or not used anymore. So we're still looking at different organisms and the structures they have, but instead of comparing their use across organisms, we're looking at their size or their function in different organisms. So let's again do some examples. I think that's the easiest. One of the most interesting ones, I think, that a lot of people don't realize is that there are some species of snakes, specifically boas, like a boa constrictor, and different types of pythons that have what we call vestigial legs. Remember, vestigial means reduced in size or function. And in this case, it's both. They're reduced in size, the bones are smaller, and in function. They don't use legs, really, for any reason, right? Snakes don't have legs that they use. So what this diagram is showing is the pelvic bones in a human, so what we would call our hip bones, so when you put your hands on your hips, the little part that sticks out, is actually present in a reduced and modified form in the snake skeleton. And again, these are boas and pythons. So these two little bones to either side of its spinal column are remnants or smaller versions of our hip bones. Now, does this mean that, a person and a snake turned into each other, or, human bones got into snake bones and changed or something like that? No, that's not what we're talking about here. And we'll get into more later about how this could have possibly happened. For now, we're just saying this is evidence to show that we are related in some way. Okay, snakes and humans share some DNA because the structures that we have are similar. Some other relatedness features that we see are also in whales and manatees. Okay, so even though whales and manatees don't walk around, they do have pelvic bones. So those same hip bones that we were talking about in snakes and humans, there's a version of those in whales and manatees, even though, again, they don't have a function. You guys are probably more familiar with the fact that some birds have wings that they don't use. So ostriches, kiwi, moa, which is kind of like an ostrich as well. These are all birds that have little wings that don't do anything for them. Okay? They don't help them fly. They don't help them swim like a penguin's wings help them swim. These wings don't do anything. But they do show relatedness to other birds that have wings that they use for flying. Cave salamanders have eyes that don't work. So cave salamanders live in the dark. They don't see anything, and they don't necessarily need to see anything, but they have eyes. The eyes, however, are completely blind. They do not, even when the cave salamanders are brought into the light, the eyes don't work. They don't allow them to see anything. But again, it shows how they are related to other salamanders who have eyes that do work. Koala bears. Their pouch, because they're marsupials, so they're, they have a pouch like a kangaroo does, is actually upside down. So instead of opening from the top, like we would imagine, if we were sitting in a chair and we had a pouch, we could look down into the opening. It opens from underneath. That doesn't make sense for the koala. In fact, the koala has a special ring of muscles to help hold that pouch shut so that their developing embryos don't fall out of it. But it shows their relatedness to other marsupials that hang upside down, like an opossum, for example. An opossum's pouch is also upside down, but that makes sense for the opossum because that's how it spends most of its life. Koalas, however, spend most of their life upright, but still have this upside down pouch, again showing their relatedness to the other marsupials. The last thing I want to point out is that this is not unique to other animals. Humans are involved in this as well. We have structures that are thought to be reduced in size and function. The appendix, for example. Now, there's some new evidence, actually, that the appendix does have a function for us, that it does help us to get good bacteria into our digestive system when we need it. But you can have your appendix taken out and you are still okay. But we still have an appendix, again showing our relatedness to other organisms that use an appendix. Wisdom teeth. Some people no longer even get their wisdom teeth in, like they just are not in their jaw. They're not even under the surface anymore. So wisdom teeth are large molars that other mammals have that we just don't use anymore. And again, showing relatedness to other species that do have wisdom teeth that they use. We still have tiny ear muscles that are not used by humans, but that are similar to the muscles in animals like cats and dogs that can rotate their ears, can move their ears independently. And again, we can't do that with our ears, but the muscles are still there. The muscles don't work. They're so small that they can't move our ears the way a cat or a dog could, but the muscles are there. Final one is goosebumps. Okay, in other animals that have lots of fur, when they get cold, goosebumps help to raise their fur up, kind of lift the fur off their skin to create kind of an insulating layer to help warm them up. Well, we still get goosebumps, but we don't have nearly enough fur on our bodies to actually help us get warmed up by having these goosebumps. But again, it shows that we are related to other organisms that do get goosebumps for a reason, and it actually helps them to warm up. Again, I'm not saying that we were a furry creature and now we turned into humans. Okay, that's not what I'm implying. I'm just saying that we share DNA with some other organisms that do have these features. Okay, our last piece of evidence for evolution and relatedness that we're going to talk about is called comparative biochemistry. And this is something new that's come about since the discovery of DNA. So since we have learned that DNA exists, we've gone around and found out what DNA all sorts of different organisms have. We can figure out what their A's and T's and G's and C's are for their different genes and their different proteins, and then we can compare them to each other. So in comparative biochemistry, what we are looking at is these molecules, specifically proteins, because that's what DNA codes for. So we're looking at the molecules in related species to find patterns in DNA and RNA. And again, these molecules are usually proteins. One very common protein that scientists can examine is hemoglobin. A lot of different organisms, animals, have hemoglobin in them. That's that protein in your blood that helps you to carry around oxygen. And so when we look at the amino acid sequence in hemoglobin, we can compare how related different organisms are. I'm going to show you a picture that will maybe help you visualize this a little bit better. So this graph is showing, if you look at the top here, the percent, let me pull this out of the way, percent of amino acids that are identical to the amino acids in hemoglobin in humans. Okay, so they're taking the human protein, hemoglobin, and comparing it to hemoglobin in the rhesus monkey, the mouse, the chicken, the frog, the lamprey. And they're saying how many of the amino acids that we have in our hemoglobin to make that hemoglobin are similar to the hemoglobin amino acids in other organisms. Now you'll see that they have arranged these organisms in order of relatedness. So at the top, we share most of our amino acid sequence for hemoglobin with rhesus monkeys. In other words, if you look at the DNA that makes the hemoglobin molecule, human DNA and rhesus monkey DNA are very similar. 95% similarity. Okay, 95% of it is the same for this particular protein, for hemoglobin. Now that's pretty interesting, but what I think is even more interesting is if you look down at the bottom of the chart, even for a common frog, an amphibian, 54% of the DNA that makes our hemoglobin is the same as the hemoglobin DNA for a frog. So 54% similarity in an amphibian, something that is so completely different from a human, and it's still got a lot of similarity. Okay, so in this comparative biochemistry, what we can do then is see who or what organisms are we most related to, what organisms are we least related to, and then also kind of what's the chain of organisms from, chicken to mice to lampreys. How are they related to each other? And how did we get those changes to come about? So discovering DNA and learning how DNA works is a really powerful tool in understanding evolution and common descent as well.